apparently this knocking noise doesn't project down to the other end of the table. All right, we're calling the meeting to order. A quorum having appeared, and more importantly, our subcommittee report authors are now here as well. So tonight we're going to start with either Public Works or Public Safety. I'll let them decide who wants to go first. Capital Budget is going to report next week, not this week.
We can do public.
And then we'll move into, I guess I want to do the reserve fund transfers, and then we'll talk about our continued budget discussion.
Okay.
I have some that are double stacked.
So Public Works first?
Public Works first.
Okay. And you have to speak up, because we can't hear you down here.
Hello. Thank you. I've got some extras here if there's not enough. I ran out of staples, so I actually had to print them out double sided.
I'd like one.
Right. Once again, working with Peter Castanino is a joy. I'll say that publicly. And in going over the stuff that was in our budget book, there are many, many pages and many descriptions of things. And I thought it was pointless to just repeat that in this smaller format. So basically, looking at last year's objectives and this year's objectives, they're very similar. There's an additional one of discussion around the planning for the Underwood Pool or the ice rink, since there are no plans in place now. That's going to be a recurring thing from year to year, I'm sure. Peter says all the GIS systems that he asked for last year are in place now. And at this point, the emphasis is going to be on training with these systems for the personnel and maintenance with the current systems and software, rather than any additional software. So there's nothing that he wants in that department. He made a very big point about the Public Works Department feels it can't cut any more staff. And any subsequent funding reductions are going to be cuts in programs or extensions in time of what has to be done. You're going to have to wait longer for whatever needs to be done in Belmont. For example, cleaning storm drains and so on. He points out all you can do is the most pressing needs first, and the less pressing will simply have to wait. Which those will be and how long they'll have to wait is unknown at this point. We talked about the question of luxury versus necessity for some of the things that the Highway Department has responsibility for. And I want to bring up, I'm not lobbying for a new pool. I don't go to the pool, okay? But consider, for example, the potential for the failure of the pool or closure of the pool. It's outlined in Peter's section in the budget book about how much you can save. If you have to cut back, closing the pool is there's a reasonable amount of money that will be saved by closing the pool. So again, this is luxury versus necessity, and that's a question that all of us in this town are going to have to be asking more and more and more. Streetlight reduction by 50% is a consideration. That hasn't been ruled out, I don't think, by anybody. It's actually part of the budget. Right, okay. Cuts in the cemetery budget would eliminate part-time staff. In the highway division, cuts could mean eliminating the watering of deltas, flower planting, tree planting, sidewalk repair, which strikes particularly close to my house, Saturday morning transfer station openings in the fall for leaf collections, and eliminating dues and memberships for professional organizations. These are all the things that he has mentioned could be up for being hit with an axe. There, however, is a little ray of sunshine. Just to go over what we did last fall at the October town meeting, which was authorizing the borrowing of $3.5 million in essence. For the Massachusetts Water Resources Local Pipeline Assistance Program, this is going to be borrowed over a 4-year period. He has received the first allotment of $714, and this money is to be used to replace the unlined water mains installed prior to 1928. So if they haven't broken yet, you might get it.
1,000, yes.
714,000.
Yeah.
Oh, what did I say?
714.
You getting it done,
Oh.
you getting it done on the cheap.
I always like a bargain. Okay, the yard waste pickup program costs $300,000. It's mandated by state law. My question, Peter's question, is should we revisit a trash fee system? And the question, should we pay as we go? Nobody has to answer tonight, obviously. I'm just throwing that out there because that's maybe another source of revenue. Did you want to bring up a thing about, or should I not mention?
Well, so I wondered,
I thought our contract for waste disposal was over $2 million.
it is, this is
yard
waste. I just wanted to mention one thing back in the February 26th initial cuts and adds list. The $28,000 part-time person for the road opening inspection was cut. I'm assuming, but I want to be sure that that could be folded into the road pavement management program and come right out of those funds.
My thought would be that if we went for roads override.
Yeah.
And in fact, the override passed, that's an important component of that whole program.
Yeah, it
Could be funded out of that.
It really is. It's been spelled out in the report of the Pavement Management Committee. You may recall that what this does is it gives staff, it gives funding for and training and time for staff who will go out and inspect the post-operation resurfacing of the roads whenever a utility like Verizon or NSTAR comes in and tears up our streets. And I've been assured by Will Brownsberger that the State Commission will train our staff, and the standards, as you may recall from the report of the Pavement Management Committee, basically say that they have to get it back within just a few millimeters of where it was to begin with. So, and they have to keep coming back until they get it right. So that really is it's a really important part.
Let me expand on that. Not only do they have to keep coming back till they get it right, but once they fix it,
Yeah.
if it in fact deteriorates over the useful life of the road, they have to come back and refix it.
Right.
Okay? So all of these bumps that we're driving over now, all right, should be bumps that could be addressed if we had a strong road patchwork, trench patching system in place. And that's an incredibly important part of the roads program, because based on everybody's experience, the minute we finish paving the road,
It gets dug up.
somebody's going to be there to dig it up. Even though we have limitations and restrictions and so forth, Keyspan is free to dig a hole in any road they want, as long as they deem it to be an emergency. And there's, we can't rule on that until after the fact. But what we can do is insist that if they do dig up the road, that they patch it in a way that's consistent with the road at the time they dig it up. And we can hold them accountable for that, but we need to be able to do that, and we just haven't had the resources to be able to do that, or the training.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to bring up, just because you brought up the subject of a trash fee, again, is that I feel obliged every time this comes up to remind people that in 1990, we did an override. The express purpose of the override, so stated on the ballot, was to raise our taxes by $2.1 million in order to continue to do the solid waste collection. And, I'm just looking at the budget book now, and it looks like we're looking at $2.5 million in the trash collection, which I think in 18 years is actually excellent.
Yes.
To have only gone up $400,000. So if one were to go to a fee-for-service, one might then consider an underride for $2.1 million if we were no longer going to be using it that way.
I don't think I've ever heard the term underride.
Well,
I rather like that.
It's part of Proposition 2.5. It's part of the law, like an override. And so all I'm saying is, in the same way that in 2001 we did a roads override, we also did a trash override, and that was the purpose. And so I think that it's not like the fees have increased that much more than $2.1 million. It's $465,000 more.
Yeah, I'm gonna just observe that, on Tom's list of reductions to level service, more than half, well more than half, comes out of Public Works.
Peter's budget.
And indeed, the things that Linda just mentioned as things that have to get cut actually did get cut and have been cut.
Are already cut, yeah. Right.
Angela?
You know, along the lines of outsourcing and finding alternate ways to raise funds and so forth, and this has not been run to ground at all, but it's the kind of idea that gets surfaced when we have those kinds of discussions, and people in town become aware of, you know, opportunities to do things. I received a call not too long ago from somebody that was interested in actually subcontracting some of the work, doing for the town, paying the town a fee to do some of the work that we do currently at the incinerator site, with the idea, for example, that through managing, and this is what jogged my memory when I saw it, through managing yard waste, leaves, grass, and so forth, that there was a possibility of creating enough value in the loom that could be created and sold as a result of that, that he could afford to operate all of the activity that takes place at the incinerator site, allow it to be open and man it from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, so residents, landscapers, and so forth could bring all of that stuff down there, and he would do everything needed to convert that over some period of time into saleable and usable loam. And I know that he mentioned that when he presented me with the proposal, I suggested he get in touch with Peter Castellino. I'm not sure what happened at this point, but I suggested he get in touch with Peter and discuss that opportunity with him. So there are, you know, when you look at this and say, oh my God, we're talking about, and there's a difference between trash pickup and yard waste for the most part, which is recyclable, okay, and mulchable. And we do some of that there, but we do it in a, not as a serious business venture, but we do it on a catch-as-catch-can basis. You know, we put the leaves there and we turn it into loom, and hopefully we get enough loom to, you know. But we even the town apparently is spending $20,000 to $30,000 a year to buy loom, so we're not even making enough loom down there to meet our own needs. So I'm not sure whether that proposal has any merit or not, but what I am sure of is it's something that ought to be investigated and looked at as an alternative that ought to be evaluated.
But it's the ultimate compost bin.
Yeah.
Well, all jokes
Not go there.
No, I think it's a very interesting idea.
No, it is an interesting idea. I was just thinking of the ultimate compost bin.
So I'm sure that you will be getting a call from this individual.
My juvenile side coming up. Anybody else with a comment on Public Works?
Is there in fact nothing going on anywhere with respect to the Underwood pool and the ice rink? I mean, is it?
Well, there was a memo from Peter last spring, outlining, the 5-page memo outlining the steps that would need to be taken and thought need to be given before one could proceed, so that exists.
For the pool.
For the pool, I'm
He's-
sorry.
He's
Yeah,
working
well,
on
both.
this year for the rink. There'll be another one this summer for the rink. Yeah,
So is anybody doing anything about his memo on the pool?
No.
not that I know of.
You know.
Liz?
That's because it's almost impossible to see how you would take on that project and bring it out successfully on the other side. It's a monumental fundraising. I mean, it really is. The arithmetic of fundraising is very, very tough. Particularly since, I know, Jim, you were going to look at this at one point, the Underwoods may wish to keep their name on the pool. It's a really, divide 3 to 4 million by the number of families in Belmont, and you'll see why nobody's reached for that problem.
There's one other thing that is in Peter's memo, and I think you'll hear from others, and that is, if it breaks, it probably ought to be closed.
Yeah.
I think the public
Yeah,
health
we said
department
that.
would say,
Yeah.
we're out on the borderline right now, keeping that pool open and trying to keep it safe. So there are no quick fixes to anything like this. A really old, out-of-date filtration system that technology is still around, but there aren't really any parts to fix the current system.
So not to mention the bathhouse, which if we touch.
Right.
Right.
Is a major
So
disaster.
effectively, our long-term strategy is wait till it dies.
Yes, and then kill it.
Well, and then you leave it empty. Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Just on this topic, Mr. Hyam was actually reviewed some of the legal documents related to the pool and was kind enough to provide me with an opinion about whether the town may be required to keep the pool in operation according to the terms of the deed for the land. We've got town council looking at that now to see whether they corroborate with Mr. Hyam's opinion. So that will inform whatever decision we end up making there.
Somehow, it's of course always extremely valuable to know what the legal realities are, but as a practical and public relations matter, it's hard for me to imagine people who are not prepared to step forward and support the pool, suing a town to force its rebuilding at the cost of huge layoffs and devastation elsewhere in the town. I just don't see that happening. I mean, it could, but.
The only other thing I would mention in that regard.
Okay, let's,
Yeah.
you know what?
I think we need,
All right, Jeff, mention it, let's move on.
just very quickly, the CPA Study Committee, Community Preservation Act Study Committee, has identified the pool as perhaps one of the biggest projects that could be paid for with CPA funds if the town were to adopt that.
Okay. Long-term plan for the pool and rink is probably not FY09 budget material. But it's obviously something that needs to be thought about. Whether we do anything about it or not is another question, but we should think about it and talk about it. Public safety.
Yes.
We still have a few more.
Oh, you have a few more?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Within Public Works, there are two other departments,
Well, you're right. Community development and,
and buildings.
I'm sorry.
Let me do buildings first. I haven't been on this subcommittee before, and I've never done building department. On the one hand, it's got lots of data about things they spend money on. Most of them are fairly obvious because they're contracts that have to be renewed, and costs are going up, both for oil, gas, electricity, and so forth. But at the same time, there's just not a lot of information that I could glean from the meeting with the building department about a lot of fundamental questions I would want to ask about the town's facilities. One of these questions I would raise is, why do we own so much building space? I mean, and I can't get the exact number, but it appears that when we have added the senior center to our list of buildings, we will have added about 40,000 more square feet to town buildings. This is not schools now. This is just town buildings than we had a few years ago. And how did this exactly come about? I mean, what was there an analysis that said? I mean, we're basically pretty flat in terms of staffing, so it's not really adding a lot of room for staff. It just seems to be adding a lot of space, which then has to also be heated and cooled and maintained and so forth. And our inventory, of course, also includes the municipal light building, which is 11,500 square feet, which is currently being used for storage. Most firms, I guess mine included, automatically go to off-site storage because it's so cheap. You can get it for about $2 a square foot. It's got heating, lighting, air conditioning, climate control, and 24/7 security, but we're using the light building instead. We also have the Benton Branch Library, which is open 5 hours a week, but which still is on the list of our our assets. I would think at some point, something's gonna have to be done about deciding how many of these buildings we need, what we're gonna do with them, and so forth. I also tried to get a fix on the operating costs of the new senior center, which will open not in FY09 but FY10, and I didn't get any information. I don't know, Tom, if you received any from the department or?
Yeah, but in fact, we're having our kickoff meeting with them tomorrow.
Okay.
So that's part of Kevin's going through is what their operational costs will be.
Okay. I mean, that's just been a big looming question, and when I asked for it, there was no information. It's apparently a complicated building, but also no inquiries had yet been made as to what the costs were going to be for maintenance and so forth.
Let them finish.
Sorry?
I was just going to add that, I'm sorry, again, just with regard to the senior center, I think NAVA is attempting to calculate some of those costs. So while she doesn't have an exact amount at this point, at least the beginning, the process has begun.
Actually,
it's a little late, but the process has begun.
NAVA actually offered to give me some things, but I don't think, the operating costs are really her responsibility. It's the building department's responsibility.
Right, but I think she's trying to work with the
Oh, yeah.
various departments to gather the information.
That's right.
So,
I just wouldn't like to have it hang there. Kevin Looney for 3 years has been asking for that information.
Well, but from
The building committee. He can only get the information from the building committee as to what the systems are and what the square
Yeah.
footage is. He can't, he has already, the one cost he does have, which is a hard cost now, is the cleaning cost.
Okay.
Which is a significant increase over what it is now. But he has, both in writing and verbally, asked at least 2 or 3 times a year for information.
No, that's
so
true.
he has definitely done that.
He had a number of complaints about that, and I think since we've already discussed here about a new life cycle cost analysis
Exactly.
before any building goes forward, I'm assuming that when that comes up for any new building, that
Yes.
somebody will have to be able to get that information. And I would at least suggest that Kevin Looney or someone in his capacity provide an independent estimate of operating costs that are independent of the architect's estimates of what the operating costs are going to be. And right now, at least his statement was he was excluded and barred from any participation in any meeting and was not given any information. I cannot attest to all of the facts on that. That's just his complaint, which I guess is what you've also.
I do know he's requested the information. I can't address the rest of what you said, but I can address that even when I was on that building committee, he was asking for information.
Okay. There's another thing I wanted to, and my memory is not good, so Pat, I'm sure you can answer this question. Have we always had all of the building cost or most in a separate department and not in departmental budgets?
Once we created that department, which I think was 1999.
Okay.
Before that, no.
But yeah, what worries me about that is that essentially the building costs are free now. As a building department head, or as a department head in an operating department, you can ask for as much space as you want. You don't have to worry about heating it, cooling it, taking care of it, or anything else, because that's all in somebody else's budget. That, to me, is a real bad way to operate, and it's not too hard to take the total cost and allocate them back out on a square footage basis, department by department, so the departments have some sense of responsibility over that. So, yes.
We tried to do that when we did the zero-based budgeting.
Yes, you did.
That exercise relative to the senior center, as it currently exists, not the new building.
Right.
But also for public works, because in the case of public works, it goes the other way. There are a lot of costs in the budgets that are paid by centralized departments, that it makes sense on the one hand. Postage, for example, for all departments is paid for through Kevin Looney's department. That's one of them. The vehicle maintenance is all paid for, whether it's a school vehicle or whatever. It's all paid for by Public Works in the Public Works mechanism.
No, actually, that isn't. Those are recharged back to the department.
Only the direct labor is recharged. The rest of the cost for the buildings, the cost for the maintenance, the overhead associated with it, none of those are cost back. It's only their out-of-pocket direct labor costs which get charged back, but the full allocated cost is not charged back. And so you've got that situation. And finally, Ralph, you're music to my ears relative to the utilization of the space in town, because one of the questions I asked myself when we were looking at the Homer building and the use of the Homer building and the way this building ended up, and the way the school administration building ended up, and the way the town hall ended up, is that we have a town hall over there, which at last count I think has, how many people working in the town hall building?
There's 3 main departments excluding credit union.
Okay, so there's 5 people, the town clerk's office with 3 people,
Our office, actually town clerk's office is 4.
4 people.
Our office.
Roughly a dozen.
Yeah, about a dozen.
All right, so you've got.
Dozen people in the entire building.
There's 12 people working in that entire building over there. And so, that sort of begs a question. I mean, it's something, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying it begs the question. And I think that same thing applies to other facilities within town, not just that one. So I fully support and am anxious to work at digging into some of these things. And these are the kinds of structural changes that we need to be addressing as we try to figure out how we're going to work on dealing with this gap that we all know that's there. We talked about, right now we have a built-in structural deficit of $1.5 million a year if we keep doing things the way we're doing. Okay, and somehow or other we've got to figure out how we force the kinds of changes that we're just referencing, which are going to be painful. There's no question, but they're changes that need to be addressed, and I think there are a lot of open questions like that we need to be paying attention to.
Just though to add on, so people don't think we have a totally empty building over there, all 4 conference rooms are being utilized tonight
Yes.
for committee meetings too.
Well, there's lots of public space.
I mean, that's 2 hours a night, I mean, that's.
Another thing that really
It's a conference center.
surprised me, I guess, because I had not really been tracking the Homer building, which we are now in, was a variety of things that still were not fixed. At the time we met with Kevin, the floor-based heating had just come on suddenly without any notice, roasting flowers, I guess, that had been on floors. But that had been, in theory, in the works for a long time. Nobody, I guess, knew how to operate it. And it suddenly came on.
Correct, that's right.
Also, we have tonight to reconsider an $80,000 request, reserve fund transfer, to fix some of the non-code compliant stair problems, enough of them to get a temporary permit, basically to occupy this building from the state, which is a real statement in itself. And then finally, we heard about the lack of an emergency generator and the fact that we have a lot of equipment that has to do with IT here in the building, and when a power failure went out at one point, there was no way for our police department and our fire department to communicate by landline. Basically, they were cut off from one another. And these sorts of things really worry me when I hear about them. My final question that I really wanted to have an answer to, but I didn't get one, was how much maintenance do you need? I mean, if we're going to have a building department, we need somebody with the expertise to tell me how much is sufficient. Because I don't know. And I've seen reports that say maybe 2% of the depreciated replacement cost of the assets. But if we have no idea, we're operating going forward, I think, sort of on a hit or miss basis, and that strikes me as a very dangerous way to proceed. Yes.
I have a question about the Homer building construction. Why are we picking up the tab of something that the contractor sounds like he screwed up?
I have.
Well, that's for the later discussion.
Yeah, I think we ought to deal with
Reserve
that
fund
and
thing.
talk about the transfer, and I don't think,
Okay.
I mean, I don't, certainly he was not, that is to say, that the building department was not the supervisor of the contractor, so
Correct.
it wouldn't be in that jurisdiction. Next department is community development. I'll try to be brief. That department is fairly straightforward. I mean, it provides a whole set of important services. That there isn't a whole lot that you can add to or cut from that budget. And it strikes me that in looking over all of the possible cuts, about the only thing you were going to end up doing in all likelihood would be taking away some inspection services or permit services or planning services. any of which probably would facilitate economic growth. So it would not seem to be, it wouldn't seem to be a great policy. There is, and I'll have to ask Tom, there's a cut in community development professional services of only $3,000. What is that one?
That's just generally where they outsource either some type of engineering services or specialty services.
Okay.
We've actually we bring it down closer to what the limits were a few years ago, but that's just still a reduction.
Okay. The one thing I would comment on this, and I'll make the recommendation, I guess, and that is that I would be pleased to see the adoption of the recommendation from the planning department that they have an additional $50,000 to provide support to the planning board for a comprehensive zoning overhaul for the entire town. And I'll explain briefly why I think this is interesting and important. It would change a lot of the zoning concepts and would try to simplify the entire process by what's called form-based zoning. In other words, as long as your buildings look like, and we would give examples of certain types of forms, and met other basic conditions, then you could move in and develop the property. It would take a lot of the uncertainty out of developers' minds, at least in the planning board's mind, and might therefore facilitate economic development. If that in fact is the case, even though we're facing a budget gap and this would be something that would increase the gap, I would either like to look at adding that back in or look at some other cuts elsewhere if we think this really might work. I'm not the expert on zoning, and I don't know that much about it. I have talked to people on the planning board. I was rather fascinated by Jay Sklut's discussion of it. But it goes to sort of priorities. What are we trying to do here? If you've got something that might generate some real increased revenue for the town, should we be cutting it, or in Jay's case, not even proposing it because it was too expensive, or should we try to get on top of it? Yeah.
I'm going to add to that. I think a perfect example of what happens when you do spend a little bit of money is what we've got that's coming forward in the form of Cushing Village, which is a development now which has a tremendous amount of community support, which based on first calculations takes tax revenues which are currently generating at $68,000 a year and raises them to over $900,000 a year. And it's a project that, based on the presentation we received at the Board of Selectmen's meeting a week and a half ago, which is, I find, very attractive in terms of addressing things consistent with the visions that were in the Vision 21 statements that go back, when we did the vision statements and vibrant community centers and so forth. This is a development that would be. And I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about it later on, but it's a development that would include 75,000 square feet of retail space, 150 residential units with complete underground parking for 250 or 260 cars, plus parking on the surface. So it takes care of all of the parking that's required by zoning in the development, and also gives the town deeded rights to parking spaces equivalent to what's there now, plus some. So when you do this kind of comprehensive planning, you spend $20,000 or $30,000 up front, and you get those kind of proposals in return. Now, I'm not endorsing it or not endorsing it. I'm only saying that's an interesting concept that we definitely need to be pursuing. And there are other places where those kinds of things can take place.
Jim?
I was chairman of the planning board when the last comprehensive plan was done. And of course, it was perfect, and there's no reason to change anything. However, more constructive comment, I think the sort of old-fashioned zoning, if you want to call it that, is perfectly adequate in about 90% of the town, which is residential. And the new changes, newer ideas are needed is only in commercial zones. And for that reason, I wonder if the 50,000 is really a realistic estimate.
Don't know, and I don't have any way to evaluate it. We could investigate it more. I just found it intriguing and thought I'd bring it up.
I just want to respond to that point.
Okay.
Okay. Jim, generally, I would agree with you, Jim, except that, and I don't know what the statistic is, but it's certainly more than 50% of the existing houses, residential houses in Belmont, are currently non-conforming to the new zoning. So I struggle with just how applicable they are. If somebody wants to put a dormer on, somebody wants to do something, they're starting with a non-conforming piece of property,
Well,
and I think that's a problem.
The fact that many houses are today non-conforming was a more or less deliberate decision we made about 25 years ago to increase the size of lots, required size for new lots in residential areas, so as to, as much as possible, keep down further development in where somebody found a 5,000 square foot lot in a residential district. I don't see any real reason to change that.
Okay, my understanding of this $50,000 position is that it wasn't even proposed in anybody's version of a budget.
It was only proposed because the departments were given an option to say, what would you do if you had 10% more?
10% more.
And that's how it came up, and that's how we found out about it.
Ralph, I had a question that goes back to the buildings and facilities one. Now, my notes are correct. You said that we have added 40,000 square feet, including the senior center.
Yes, that's roughly what I found it very hard to calculate this exactly, so I'm saying that's my guesstimate. Right?
Okay, and what amount of that 40,000 is attributable to the senior center?
About 18,000.
About 20 or 22,000 square
No.
feet?
No.
18,000.
No, because you have to subtract the Our Lady's property, because that isn't owned by us, so you're building a, 19,000 square foot building, and we have, yeah.
Well, that's part of the problem. I didn't have the Our Lady square footage to net out.
10, maybe 9,
Yeah, okay.
something like that. But then don't forget the fire stations. I mean,
Yeah.
what Ralph is saying is this is over the past several years.
Yeah,
Right,
and
I was
also
just trying to understand
yeah.
where it came from.
Well, I mean, you added a lot of useful square footage in this building compared to what it had been, and you still have the light department. It's the fire stations, the addition to the Homer building, and the senior center, basically.
Right, that's true.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a brief comment regarding the additional square footage in the town. And it's a common sense, I think, kind of a dynamic. When we have through the years added square footage and made changes, that required votes, I think it was done in response. It's a political dynamic is the answer to the question. The reason many of these things have happened is that we often have vested interests who come before the selectmen and advocate for what it is that they want, and that's fine, and most often what they want, I'll give the Benton Library as an example, they have pretty much gotten. And the problem I see with this is that all of that is done in isolation. You have the vested interest and the vested interest and the vested interest, and I think we do need a more comprehensive plan for the town for the next 5 years or for the next 10 years, so that people can come together, the vested interest, those who are very active and very knowledgeable about what's going on in the town, but we also need to pull in the more ordinary citizens, because they are the ones who also go out and vote, and they may not be totally aware of everything that is happening. So it's just a comment. I think that we need a more comprehensive plan, a better vision, I think, for the town.
So now that we're really done with public works, we'll move on to public.
Thank you.
Could I just ask one
Yes.
question, or just add a point here? Your point you made about fully loaded department budgets where
Yeah.
include all of the overhead.
Yeah.
Seems to me that with the new munis system, there might be something that we can achieve. And are you suggesting, Ralph, that it may be a way to identify additional savings, or at least from a departmental perspective, control with a spend up.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, and I guess it came from my own personal experience. I was in a firm that during a big downturn in economics went from 1,000 people to 300, and it maintained the same space until the CEO decided to start allocating rent out to each of the operating centers and saying, it costs this much, this is part of your bottom line profit and loss. At that point, all the groups got together and gave up 2/3 of the space immediately for rent. I mean, if it doesn't cost anything, of course you'll take a lot. If it starts costing you something and you can start trading that off against other things, there's an amazing effect that the transparent price has on behavior.
Actually, I have one other thing, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, this is an important point.
You didn't mention at all in your presentation anything about the perennially favorite topic of consolidating town and school buildings. And is there any news or thoughts on that?
I'm not on that committee. I've been involved in that debate for 20 years. I think it'll take 2 or 3 more generations before it gets resolved, so I don't have anything new. I guess the one thing I will say that I think it's difficult, and it's simply a function of the pretty much of the statutes and how the town handles school budgets. We give the budget to the school, and the school department spends it as it deems fit. And I think by and large, having served also on the school committee, that there are some good people over there doing maintenance and so forth, and it's not like they're just giving short shrift to it. On the other hand, if you talk to the average voter going out on a new building like the Wellington, they say, well, what's the guarantee that this is going to be maintained? And from a standpoint of the warrant committee or the selectmen, there is no guarantee. It's basically whatever the school department and the school committee want to do, and that's just the way it is. You do see this in letters to the editor. What is going to happen? Don't know. Yeah.
Pat?
Well, in response to that, I think, number one, I would say look at the Chenery.
Yeah.
The Chenery today is 10 years old, and it looks like it looked the day it was built. Secondly, the new MSBA rules actually force the community to maintain its buildings. And they will not allow you to participate in the program if you don't, and you can't demonstrate it. And they actually come to the town and look at all the buildings.
That's good.
That are on the school side. They don't look on the town side,
Yeah.
but they do look on the school side. So, I think the answer to that is, first of all, I say Exhibit A is the Chenery,
Yeah.
because it looks superb, and it is maintained. And if you look at the school department budget, you will see that they do spend money on the
Yeah.
Chenery every year. And they are spending money at the Wellington, even though it's a sinking home.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still spending money on the Wellington, so we're not at where we were 15 years ago, where we literally let the Chenery fall apart, the old Chenery. I think we are doing that. So if people do ask that question, that's what I would like.
That's a
to
good
see the
response. I
answer.
mean, as I said to begin with, I've
Right.
worked with the school committee for a long time. I have great respect for the people there. I know what their basic values are. And with this additional SB requirement, then we do it.
Right, and Winthrop and Burbank and the Butler schools still look very good too. If you
Yeah.
go into them, they look, they're in a whole lot better shape than they should be for their age.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Public safety, sorry.
Challenge to follow Ralph on that presentation. Thank you, Ralph. We'll start with the police department. I've handed out the report as well as an organization chart for fiscal year 09. And just briefly on the staffing issues, which have been, in the time I've been on the Public Safety Committee, a recurring theme is there continues to be transfers, retirements, injuries within the department. And when we met with the chief and the assistant chief back in January, there was presently a need for 3 additional officers. I think those since have been hired, but they're in the academy.
The list has been called.
List has been called. So during fiscal year 08, even though they're budgeted 48, they're down at least 3, and there's a need to hire them. The list has been called. So they do anticipate a continued uptick in the overtime budget for the balance of fiscal year 08. The budget for '09 is 48. They don't anticipate at this point, and also during fiscal year '08, they had 2 sergeants, 1 sergeant and 2 lieutenants retired, and of course there were promotions within those positions. So my sense of this department is it's always in a flux, in the sense that there's either people transferring, retiring, promotions, new chiefs, and in the time I've been on the committee, there's never been a stable force, if you will, to determine, in fact, what the output is of the department on a daily basis or annual basis, if you will. They do anticipate, although there is no planned retirements for fiscal year '09, they're estimating at this point that 2 additional officers might be retiring. So again, another need to churn through either through promotion or additional hire. As far as the budget for fiscal year '09, it is increased by 7.6% from fiscal year '08. That is primarily related to the wage increases through collective bargaining and a slight uptick in the overtime budget, although now with the cuts, that's going to be decreased. So it's primarily personnel. We discussed of course, the enhanced budget, which obviously is not sustainable, and also the decreased services budget. And the decreased services budget is simply eliminating personnel. And you eliminate personnel, and you need to decide at that point in time what amount of coverage you need within the community, because they've always operated with less than the budgeted amount, and so there's always a need to incur additional overtime. I mean, at times they've been down to 39 active in the years that I've been on the committee. And so that's a decision that would be made or need to be made in terms of whether we would be willing to live with less police officers on the street by reducing the overtime budget, because most of their budget is personnel. So for me and for the committee, ongoing issues, and at least from my perspective, is this ongoing state of flux within the department. I know the chief has now been in position for at least, has it been a year? Close to a year. And we discussed the need to have a stabilized force, and then consider alternative ways to deliver the service, if you will. Of course, we've always talked about regionalization. The one area that there seems to be an opportunity is in 911. Certainly that would need to be regionalized in order for any type of regionalized fire suppression or emergency medical response to be, I guess, implemented. And that may be decades off as well, Ralph. And of course, the department should always continue to make emergency preparedness a top priority. We talked briefly about the school resource officer. We got positive feedback on that, and I know Dr. Holland in the meeting, in the school committee meeting that I attended, also said that seems to be working well. Other members of the committee, anything else to add?
Sorry.
I just want to jump in. You said there was a 7.6% increase.
Yeah.
Immediately followed by
7.7% increase.
Yeah, a lot of that was salary increases. It's easy to infer that there was a 7.6% increase in salary. That's not the case at all. I'm not sure that the salary increases were well under 5%, 4%, I think.
But there was an increase in step and things of that nature. I mean, most of the increase relates to wages.
What happens is, obviously, if you're at the top of the step, you just get the pure percentage raise. If you're a younger member, you get the step, so that actually multiplies, as you're saying.
Okay, so is the inference then correct that if we paid last year X amount of money in salary for a certain number of officers, that this year we're paying 7.8% or 7% or something in the order of 7% more for those same services? Is that what I'm hearing? Because of steps?
Yes.
Plus the agreement on the wage and on the concession on health insurance.
But that's,
I said primarily through.
That's a 7% increase in salary, no matter.
Primarily on
steps,
wages.
That's still a 7%
There are other increases in the budget, but primarily in wages.
And let me just follow up what Angelo said, and I would look at the same thing. With 7.7% increase in the police department, 7.2%, I think, in the fire department.
That's correct.
And the schools, who obviously have a much bigger budget than either one of these, under their current manifestation, or the warrant committee's defined level service budget is really only a 5.3% increase over last year.
It's something that doesn't sit there.
So we've been talking a lot about how we can't sustain 7.5% increases across the board.
I'd like to get that number verified, Tom, because I think there's something wrong there. I certainly hope there's something wrong.
We had some, before Jeff, we had.
The increase is 7.7%, primarily related to wages. I mean, that's, if you do
Is
the.
there more
do the-
people in there? Is there more people? Is there more?
But I'm not saying it's all, but,
overpaying?
but Angel, it's not all wages. But the increase is, if you do the math, it's 7.7% increase in the department budget from '08 to '09.
Okay, let's Linda have a
08
crack,
budget,
and then
yes.
Jim.
One of the things that comes up every time we go to talk to the police chief is the problem of the cost of training a new policeman that will be hired and come on. And then the phenomenon of leaving to go work in the more exciting environment of Cambridge or Boston. And that represents I think, quite a loss of our investment for the town of Belmont when you have that happen. And I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what can be mandated or put into law or what's allowed. But that happens fairly frequently. We have lost young policemen. They don't stick around if they know they can go someplace else where it's more exciting, there's more chance for advancement, the salaries are higher. That's a problem we're gonna get.
Fortunately, that hasn't happened in a couple of years now.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Right.
Fortunately, that has not happened in a couple of years now.
Okay.
Jim, did you have something?
My only point was that I assume that in summarizing compensation, it includes things like health insurance, which are generally carried with compensation.
No, that's separately stated.
Oh, separately, I'm sorry.
In fact, health insurance decreases.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, did you have something?
I'm just going to say that step 5, the Quinn bill, also is a factor in the salary piece.
Mr. Chairman, that was sort of going to be my point, is you're not comparing apples to apples here, because you're looking at two specific departments versus a percentage that was quoted for the schools across the board. I can tell you, if you look at the school budget, there are particular units of school staff that got a 9% increase.
That's correct.
Police and fire particularly have many components of their compensation, including Quinn bill, uniform allowances, and things that don't necessarily apply to other departments. So I'm not sure it's really an accurate
Well,
comparison.
a dollar is still a dollar, no matter how you spend it, so that's kind of where I think I'm coming from, Tom.
Just to go for the Quinn bill, that you may not realize, if you go from you come in with no degree, it's 0%. If you come in with an associate's, it's 10. If you go from your associate's work during your process, you get a bachelor's, it's 20. And if you go to your master's, it's 25. So there is a distinct possibility that you could get your associate's degree in FY08 and then get your bachelor's in FY09 and boost your 10% there.
However, that's offset by state payments to us. We don't fund the Quinn bill totally.
We receive
We
50%.
receive how much? 50%.
But we still have to fund it out of our pocket.
But we get state
We budget it.
reimbursement
The
for
Quinn
it.
bill comes back to reverse, not the budget. The budget, we budget the whole amount.
It's not reflected in the police department.
But it's reflected, I think, in defense of what Tom's trying to say, it's reflected in the revenue that the town generates in terms of its cherry sheet reimbursement. Just some amount.
I'd be interested to see what percentage of.
Yeah. It's something that needs to be analyzed. It's something that needs to be
The
analyzed.
offset, or the offset from the state.
Scott, your question?
Mr. Chairman, Scott Sherwood, school committee, my hand was a little bit during the discussion of police salaries that had to go higher for the schools. Because of the contractual allowance business in 1 year's contract, where 1 year's budget whereby salaries are artificially low because we have an amount in the contractual allowance for collective bargaining, which then gets added back into the salary. There's basically a double hit in that year in salary, which is offset by a decrease in the collective bargaining allowance, which may in fact be the same thing as happening with the police. Effectively, in the year after the collective bargaining, the contract is settled, 2 years worth of salary increases finally going into the salary line, but the contractual allowance goes down commensurate with one of those 2 years.
Barbara.
Is that the case here?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
The case here?
Scott,
Okay.
thank you for bringing that
Thanks for
up,
the
because I
clarification,
forgot
Scott.
about that.
Yeah.
We have a salary and benefit reserve that has been funding the salary increases for FY08. And we did this year and next year's increase.
All right, okay, well, that's helpful.
That's an
Very nice
explanation. Thank
clarification.
you.
Okay, thanks. We can, the temperature on that one can go down.
A very simple reading of the line item budget reveals that the bulk of your increase is coming in traffic management and community services.
Tom?
Okay, actually.
At the wage level?
Maybe I'll answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. When the chief came on, Chief McLaughlin, he actually restructured where some of the items should have been actually being paid out of. So it may look like it's a huge increase in one area and a reduction in the other.
But you don't see the reduction in the other. If you look through these.
I mean, the personnel is the
That's
same.
where you're both-
Well, I guess I don't understand your point, Robbie. The number of personnel is the same as 08, so.
I'm just saying the dollars are those accounts. I can't attest
Okay,
to
but
why.
the personnel are the
there's-
same, so I'm not certain where there's been increases in personnel, because there hasn't been.
I'm not saying there
Yeah,
are.
okay.
I'm
The allocation of
saying-
expenses.
It's the allocation of expenses. It's helpful to understand in the collective bargaining how that's impacted.
Which speaks very highly for the ability, the new Munis software, to be able to look at this stuff on a year-to-year basis going forward. I know Barbara's got her arms around this, she looks at it, but it's a very, very, for those of us that spend time looking at financial statements, reading town financial statements is a task when you're trying to compare actual expenses of 1 year to budget expenses for that year to budget expenses for the next year. And I know that, you know, we've talked a lot about that. Barbara's done a lot of work in that area. And, you know, the numbers that I'm used to seeing is how much, never mind what we budgeted last year, how much did we spend last year? And how does that compare to how much we're budgeting this year? All right, and where are those differences coming from? And looking at those things, account by account, breaking it down. And I know that that's a tremendous amount of work, and until recently, we just haven't had the tools to be able to do that. Is that fair, Barbara?
There will always be discrepancies from one year to the other because the way town government works, we might have a Cushing Square study this year. We might have an actuarial study in my department one year, but not the next year. So things go up and down, things that, it's not like in a business.
But you know, we'd have that in businesses too, but we look at it line item by line item. Those one-time expenses pop up on the expense sheet.
Well, when we see the cash expenses, we will see the progression from one year to another. Not in the budget per se, because of the way we budgeted, but in the cash expenses, we will see the progression. I think that's what you're looking for.
Mark, is there more on police?
Any other questions?
I figured it might be coordinate this discussion with the discussions we had in session.
It's a clarity.
I'm not sure we can, we can think about that.
The fire department current staffing level is 57.5. It has been at that level for 07, 08, and 09. The increase for fiscal year 09 budget is 7.2%, again related to wage increases in EMT training costs, overtime, and a one-time capital outlay for EMS reporting software and equipment, which I'm not sure if that's still in the, any of that is in the cuts that are being presented. Major policy issues, again, we've continued to discuss alignment of needs and resources. We talked at length with the chief about this, and then I followed up with a subsequent discussion as well, where if you look at the incident report, there were 150 in 08, 150 fire incidents, or projected to be 150 fire incidents, while providing 1,300 medical transports, which of course, as we've stated in the past, or Liz so eloquently stated last year, it's a national trend. Although the majority of the resources seem to be allocated towards fire suppression. And when I discussed this with the chief, he was concerned about how we had stated this in prior years, and he said, look, we are required to respond at a certain level on fire, and we also are required to respond at a certain level on medical transports, and in both situations, we've responded appropriately. And even though the budget appears to be allocation more towards fire suppression, that is what is needed in order to respond to fires. And so I mean, what I came away with is that it's a complex area to evaluate, and we can't just suggest that we should reduce the budget on fire suppression and go more towards EMT, because according to the chief, they're doing what they're asked to do. Now, certainly he supports the concept, as he always has, about regionalizing some aspects of what they provide, both in medical transport and or fire suppression, as a way to further reduce possibly operating costs, but more importantly, I think from his perspective, capital costs. And so again, regionalization continues to be a policy issue for the chief. He's fully supportive of it. Not much has changed in the years on regionalization. I mean, we do have the Metro Northwest Regional Consortium that we're currently a member on, and there has been some discussion on regionalization of fire, but I'm not certain how close we are on that, even though the fire chief is in full support of doing something as it relates to regionalization, both in the fire suppression side either or on the EMT side.
And I think it's in the fall of 08 that the decision will be made.
That's on ALS in particular. There is a subcommittee outside of our committee that is looking at, and that I'm a member of, although Liz is doing all the work, on the evaluation of advanced life support service. And so we've started the ball rolling on that issue to determine the feasibility, financial feasibility and viability of moving towards providing more ALS versus basic life support, where we have an opportunity to increase our revenues on transports if in fact our personnel are providing ALS, which currently I think we only have 1 or 2 EMTs currently on staff.
Liz, I assume, I remember you shared the outline of the program that you were doing with me, and at the time I read it, I felt very comfortable with it. It just raises a question that I'm thinking about now. In the process of evaluating ALS versus non-ALS, you're also evaluating the possibility or the impacts of outsourcing even BLS as well, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so you're evaluating the whole thing.
Everything.
From all 3 components of ambulance service and what the impact of that is in the town budget.
That's correct.
Okay.
Also, you will be seeing an outline of the full study in May before we embark on it.
Okay.
I mean, anecdotally, if you think about it, it makes sense, but I mean, we're running the numbers and looking at it more closely. The chief, I think, feels strongly as well that it needs to be looked at from this perspective, although he continues to suggest that that's the way of the future, and that is for our department to provide ALS. We would not be beholden to any private ambulance service, subject to contractual issues, companies going out of business, things of that nature.